Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever or whenever you so happen to be watching this newest episode of Kingdom in State. My name is Grant Henry Jabri Harrison on the other line as well. You know how we do here. We ask a very simple question on this program. We are just trying to figure out to what extent Christians and the church are meant to get involved in the political process in this strangely created American juxtaposition where the Constitution tells us that we wield authority, yet Romans 13 tells us that we are meant to yield to authority. We are asking, at what point are we meant to participate and have some sense of authority ourselves in the process? So with that being said, we jump right now to our incredible guest on the other line, Dr. Ben Carson. He's a man that needs no introduction, a towering intellect, one of the most prominent conservatives in the nation, and a true man of God. Dr. Carson, thank you so much for joining us this morning, sir.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
To start with here, let me ask, tell us a little bit about American Cornerstone Institute, if you can.
Well, after the election in 2020, I decided that I could retire again. I failed the first time. So I said, this time I'm going to succeed. But looking at the direction of the country, I said, I can't have any fun on the golf course or cruising around the world. So I and a number of outstanding individuals at HUD got together and formed a think tank / do tank called American Cornerstone, which emphasizes the cornerstone principles upon which our nation was founded, those being faith, liberty, community, and life. And we also have a component for the children called the Little Patriots program. Why America Matters was our first children's book, helping the children to focus on those principles. Created equal, the painful past, confusing present, and hopeful future of race in America. And it's a pushback against the way that people are using race to divide people in our country.
And if you guys want to know, by the way, it's AmericanCornerstone.org. That's AmericanCornerstone.org is the website. Definitely go check this out for yourself. And Dr. Carson, I want to ask there, you said the four cornerstones, faith, liberty, community, and life. Can I touch on that one with faith in particular? And as it pertains to this podcast here, Kingdom and State, in your opinion, what role, if any, do you think Christians or even the institution of the church should play in the political process in America?
Well, obviously, when you look at our Constitution, you look at the very first amendment, and, it guarantees us freedom of religion. It says nothing should be established or prevent the use of your religion in your life. So that means that our founders recognized that that was a very important value that people had, their faith. And some people say, yeah, but, separation of church and state, that's part of our founding. No, it isn't. There's nothing in the Constitution that mentions separation of church and state. That was subsequently mentioned in the Supreme Court ruling. And of course, Thomas Jefferson talked about the necessity of keeping the two away from each other so that one doesn't rule the other. But there is nothing in our founding documents or in our founding principles that precludes a person from living their faith. And there's no better place than in government to demonstrate the living of your faith, those kinds of godly principles of loving your fellow man, caring about your neighbor, developing your God-given talents so that you become valuable to the people around you, having principles and values that guide your life. And, they will know that you are Christians by your love. There's no reason that a person who is in the public eye cannot also be a loving and compassionate individual. And in fact, that is a tremendous witness when they are.
Yeah. And you talked about loving your neighbor and the importance of that. How important is it to have community and shared values regarding the conservative influence in America?
Well, when you look at the way that our country developed, you recognize how important community was. There were small towns and villages sometimes only 25, 50, or 100 families. They all had different skills and talents, but what they were able to do is work together to create synergy. And that's how those towns expanded and eventually coalesced. And that's how we became an extremely powerful nation. But in order to do that, obviously, you have to tend to focus more on those things that bring you together and not those things that pull you apart. And what's interesting is in this country, you can probably take the most radical right-wing person and the most radical left-wing person, and they're going to agree on a large majority of things. But we have a media and a society that has a tendency to take those things they disagree on and blow those things up and make those into the most essential factors in a person's life, even though they're not all that important. And, we have to get to the point where we recognize if we want to have that community strength, we recognize that we have much more that brings us together than tears us apart. And we have to understand what our goals and values are. And for the most part, throughout the history of our nation, we have had that sense of community that has brought us together, particularly in times of distress. Because even though we had different methods of achieving goals, we had basically the same goals. We've reached a point in our country now where that's in doubt. Maybe we don't have the same goals. Maybe there are some people who actually like the way our country is run. They like our system that is people-centric, of, for, and by the people, because there are others who feel that the correct method is to have a government-centric nation. And those people want to replace our faith in God with faith in government and have government control every aspect of our lives. And of course, if you know history, you recognize that so many people came to this country specifically so that they could be free, so that they could live their lives the way they wanted to. They could pursue happiness in the direction that they wanted to go in without the heavy foot of government mandating what they had to do, where they had to live, how they could do things. That was never the intention for this nation. So that is what is behind the destruction of our sense of community. And that's why we see so much division in our country right now. And I think what we have to do is really engage in conversation with each other. We can't get in our respective corners and throw hand grenades at each other. That never works to bring people together. But if we begin to discuss our values and principles, I think we will find that maybe we're not as far apart as we think we are. And maybe there are ways that we can compromise on methods without compromising on principles.
Dr. Carson, I appreciate so much about what you just said, and I'm reading from another portion of the website here, AmericanCornerstone.org, by the way, if you're following along, AmericanCornerstone.org. The ACI's mission statement is, quote, dedicated to promoting and preserving individual and religious liberty, helping our country's most vulnerable find new hope, and developing methods to decrease the federal government's role in society to improve efficiency to best serve all our nation's citizens. Doctor, we kind of live in this age of a little bit of cult of personality, right? I think we're getting now to where some of the volatility is coming from, I have to pick my team and fight to the bitter end to defeat your team. Could we solve some of the problem here by focusing less on the federal government, more on local state issues? And if so, is there even a way to do that? How do you pull away from so much focus on a federal government that's become this bloated monstrosity that just touches everything in our lives?
Well, recognize that the founders of this nation spent a lot of time studying governments. All the governments of all the civilizations that ever existed before our nation came into existence. They studied. And they wanted to take away the good things as well as the bad things in terms of their decision making. What they came to the conclusion of is that governments have one thing in common. They grow, they infiltrate, and they dominate. That's what they do. It's sort of like a lion. Lions aren't bad animals, but they kill gazelles and they eat them. That's what they do. And doesn't make them bad, doesn't make government bad. But what it does mean is that you have to control it. And that's why they spent so much time and effort on our Constitution to give the people a tool and a mechanism by which they could control the natural growth and extension of government into their lives.
So we talked about you talked about the founding fathers and the Constitution, and how faith played a tremendous part in that. Do you think that we would get to a point again in our nation where faith is a pillar in our government or our society again?
Well, let's hope so. We've had historically 4 great revivals in our country. They've all occurred around the time of either war or pestilence. We've got both of those now. So maybe it's time for another revival. And I think it's particularly time for people to start pushing the kinds of Judeo-Christian values that make people move in the direction of love and peace and brotherhood and well-being. You know, it was Alexis de Tocqueville that came to America in 1831 to study our nation because the Europeans were just so fascinated with the United States. They said, how can this nation, barely 50 years old, already be competing with us on virtually every level? How is that possible? And he was going to dissect it all and figure out what the heck was going on. And he looked at our government and he was very impressed with the separation of powers and the way that we did things. He was very impressed with our business model, which encouraged entrepreneurship and innovation. He was very impressed with our educational system. He could find a mountain man and the guy knew how to read. The guy could tell him about the Constitution. He'd never seen anything like that any other nation. But what impressed him the most were our churches and the sermons that he heard coming out of those pulpits, which inspired people to do what is right, which gave people a moral basis, which gave people courage, which inspired a ragtag bunch of militiamen to defeat the most powerful empire on earth. And he concluded his 2-volume set called Democracy in America by saying, I've discovered why America is great. America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. And that is what we have to concentrate on now. How can we be good again? And I don't know that we can be good if we spend all of our time fighting each other, if we allow the purveyors of hatred and division to prevail as they try to drive wedges between the populace on the basis of race, income, age, gender, religion, you name it, driving wedges, divide and conquer. We must be able to resist that.
Dr. Carson, it's no secret that one of the paramount issues of concern over the last several years, but especially last year, has been this issue of education, right? And I think what this really gets to is the general notion that our children are sacred, meant to be protected. But most importantly, if you can train up young, then it will end up being how future generations go. I want to go towards something on the American Cornerstone Institute website here, the Little Patriots program. You mentioned that at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is? And you also are the author of a children's book, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes. The children's book is called Why America Matters. And it's beautifully illustrated with cartoon figures, which emphasize to the children our founding principles of faith and how that impacts the way that we treat each other, of liberty, and why this country was a beacon of hope for people who wanted to be free, of community, and how working together gets us much further than division, and of life and the importance to respect life from the womb to the tomb, and quality of life, and do everything that we can to improve that. And that book has Liberty Eagle in it. He's a little icon that sort of guides you through. And we emphasize the fact that Liberty Eagle, the symbol of our nation, the eagle has two wings, a left wing and a right wing. And it can't fly with two left wings, and it can't fly with two right wings. But when they work together, it can fly quite majestically. And that's something we want to get across to the children. We also have an online learning program that is free of charge, by the way, at littlepatriotslearning.com. We have underwriters who make that possible. And it talks about our documents, like the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, and the founding principles of our nation. And it talks about how we came into existence. Not only the good stuff, the bad stuff too. We don't hide the warts, but we put it in perspective. And see, that's one of the things that critical race theory, the 1619 Project, I think they don't put things in perspective. They just grab one little thing like slavery and try to blow that up and make it seem like the United States was unique because we had slavery. Slavery has been a part of civilization since there has been civilizations, if you know anything about history. What was unique about us is not that we had slavery, but that we had so many people who were vehemently against it that we were willing to fight a civil war and lose a large portion of our population to get rid of it. That's probably a much better thing to teach our children.
So I think we both agree that believers should be involved in politics. How do we get the church more involved?
Well,
the Big C Church.
That's a very good question. One of the things that we did when I was secretary at HUD is we started a program called the Mustard Seed Program, based on the book of Matthew, and faith the size of a mustard seed can move a mountain. And basically, we said, these churches, particularly in some of these depressed communities, they know a whole lot more about the people who are there than a bunch of bureaucrats sitting in Washington, D.C. So why don't we partner with these churches and let them take the lead and support what they're doing? And we found that tended to work much better. For instance, I remember one church in Riverside, California, they had some extra property. So they built 4 homes on that property. And they would get homeless families, bring them into that setting. And they had a lot of people in the church with different skills, talents, and they would help those people get back on their feet. And usually within a year, those people were independent and back out being productive in the world. You generally won't get that with a government program. Government-run programs tend to keep people in dependency rather than move them to self-sufficiency. So I think that's a place where the church can play a tremendous role, but church needs to be proactive. They've got to get out there. The church is not a social club. It's a place where people come together and they strengthen each other. Testimonials help people to see that maybe if they're having a problem, that they're not the only one having that problem. Others have it too, and that there are solutions and ways to get out of it. And working collectively and combining our strengths creates an enormous amount of synergy for solving problems.
Dr. Carson, we want to be respectful of your time here. We can't thank you enough for joining us. So last question here, and then we'll give you the last word before we go. But what would you say to someone that may be thinking to themselves, a lot of what we're talking about is contingent upon me being able to express myself on social media? And you know where I'm going with this, right? I want to be able to express myself and give my genuine opinion, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, but I'm fearful of being banned in this day and age of woke culture and cancelization. What's your encouragement to someone like that?
My encouragement is that necessity is the mother of invention. And there are a lot of people who recognize the danger of empowering the social media the way that we have. And we have to have alternatives. And there are a number of alternatives that are being worked on now. Some are already established and are growing. And I think will grow. And I think soon there will be a platform that is extremely competitive with the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world. And I think people will flock to those in droves when they know that they're not going to be canceled and that they can state their opinion. But freedom of speech is foundational to this nation. And if it is suppressed by big tech and by the media with the compliance of the government, that is the same as if the government is suppressing your speech. People need to understand that and react to it.
Doctor, on the way out here again, can't thank you enough for your time, but just want to ask, anything else you want to end on, anything we didn't touch, anything you want to leave our audience with?
Well, I just want to leave people with the thought that we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. And this nation is so strong, it cannot be brought down by China or Russia or North Korea or Iran or any external force, but it can be brought down from within. And that's why Jesus said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Abraham Lincoln echoed that again. We, the American people, have to be smart enough to recognize that the real enemies are those who are trying to divide us.
Dr. Carson, again, we genuinely thank you for your time today. We'll be signing off for this episode of Kingdom and State. For myself and Jabri Harrison on the other line there as well, we sincerely love each and every one of you. We will see y'all next time.